our presenters today. We have Joanne Fornes. She's a Pilates plus OLLI teacher. And recognizing the COVID-19 upended, she previously enjoyed teaching with OLLI. Let me see. She was in the Peace Corps in the 60s, and she enjoys working with race forces, traveling, and teaching. Using all that she's experienced in the movement, she is realizing a life theme through the continuum of time played out from the 70s on. Joanne credits decades spent studying the continuum movement with its founder, Emily Conrad, with helping her navigate the unknown with courage, creativity, and confidence. Jane Woodward has spent her life accumulating a variety of degrees, a BA in German, a Master's of Education, MPA, JD, which I don't know what those things are, but she can share with you.
Master's in Public Administration and Jewish doctor.
Her experiences from teaching to youth hustling all over Europe, from developing career conventions for women in Nashville's Business Expo to raising Arabians, from evaluating local, state, and federal government programs to practicing law, life has been a creative and intense adventure. Since coming to Humboldt in 2007, she has focused on developing courses for OLLI and managing the OLLI at HSU brown bag lunch presentations. Alongside research in quantum mechanics, consciousness, creativity, energy, and functional medicine, the brain, Alzheimer's, dementia, the microbiome, environmental issues, and the transition movement, and the aging process, she views life through the lens of existentialism. So all that being said, I'd like to introduce Jane and Joanne and let them get started today. Thanks for being here.
Hi there, everybody. And we're going to do this a little differently than in the past. We're going to invite you to participate after we give our little talks. We have written some of it out. What I have up on the screen is how we advertise this talk, which is basically talking about how the gift of time with this pandemic has influenced us and given us, if it has, the opportunity to look back and see how our lives have changed, if they have, comparing where we've been to where we are and where we want to go. So on we go. Now, why don't I go to the next screen? Well, I did earlier. There you go. In this talk, we're asking ourselves and you to examine how COVID-19 has affected the continuum of your life, your lifestyle, daily practices and habits, and your thoughts and plans for the future. How have you used this gift of time? What have you learned? What have you changed? And what do you see going forward? In other words, assuming you've had this gift of time to re-examine your life, what have you learned about yourself, your culture, and your life choices? Has it affected your appreciation of life? How have your lifestyle and habits changed, and will these changes last after the pandemic ends? What have you learned about yourself and others? I've asked Joanne to start addressing how this gift of time has affected her and what new practices and explorations it has unleashed. Whether it has given her the time to review her life and values, to examine how her time spent in Japan and the Peace Corps influenced those values, and in particular, how her life has been affected by her years spent with Emily Conrad, founder of a practice called Continuum, and how the years she spent practicing Continuum movement affected how she experiences her life and linked all aspects of her life into a whole. Then it will be my turn. And I'll discuss how I've spent these last 5 months of the pandemic and whether addressing the above questions has given me insight into the continuum of my own life and resulted in changes in my life plans. And now on with Joanne and the continuum of her life.
I wanted to show a couple of items. Yeah, I'm up in the right-hand corner. These represent what I would have thought 6 months ago represented the continuum of my life. Things I've loved all my life: horses, and dancing. When I was a kid, I took ballet classes, and I thought, you know, I would be a ballet dancer. It really appealed to me. I didn't know there were any other forms of dancing. And when life intervened and my family left the States and moved to Japan, dancing ceased. When I came back at 14, I was obviously too old to pick up ballet again, or so I thought. But anyway, these two themes run through my life, but there are others that come in, and I like to view my life as a tapestry, that I have some threads that run through everything and some that are fairly unique. And this emblem of appreciation I put here because during the 2 years I lived in Japan, we were asked to present a Christmas program. And I was the Virgin Mary being drawn in on a paper mache. I'm getting an echo. On a paper mache horse. I didn't have to say anything, but that was really my first introduction to being on a screen. And here I am today, which is only, I think, the third time in my life I've done anything like this. Didn't talk. Second time I moved around, but I didn't have to talk, and now I'm talking. So here I am, emblem of appreciation, indicating also that I have done a fair amount of living abroad. When I was a teenager, well, 12 to 14, we lived in Japan. This was post-war Japan, 10 years after the end of World War II. And I developed, I guess, an appreciation of time in this period of COVID when the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima happened. I never realized what 10 years actually meant until I'm looking back all these years and realizing I was there just 10 years after the war. I still found the Japanese people, maybe it's their cohesiveness, but their ability to change, to adapt to something so horrific as losing that war, the emperor losing his supreme place in their life, cities being destroyed. People were still kind and nice to us. And we had a maid who worked for us. I can't imagine what it must have been like for her, because she had a husband who had died during the war. He'd been a colonel during the war. And here she was working for a military family and living in this tiny little room in the house that we occupied, military housing. I didn't realize that it hadn't been there forever. You know, the naivete of being a teenager. But she would make the most exquisite Japanese dolls, samurai warriors, geishas. They were just beautiful. And she would sit for hours when she wasn't working around the house making these dolls. So that was one area where I began to appreciate a culture really different from my own. I'm really happy my family did a lot of traveling. Katsuko would come with us. We'd travel, she'd translate. It was quite wonderful. I saw a lot of Japan during that period of time. And it fostered in me a real love of travel. So when I went to college, I knew that I wanted to study abroad. I mean, these days when somebody goes abroad, they do all sorts of, you know, they get jobs diving in Australia, you know, things like that. But all I could think of was going to school. So I spent 2 years, or 1 year in France, studying French, ending up with a French degree, which would be another thread of the tapestry that would work its way through my life. And then I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps. And being in Japan was learning about and appreciating a very ancient culture, something I had never experienced before. Europe and France was, you know, I, like many people, had studied European history. Africa was, and Kenya was really an initiation into a landscape. And maybe we can go on to the next slide. Jane, next. There we are. And this is Jane. Jane's in the red shirt in the foreground. And Jane is one of those pieces of thread that winds through my life. Thanks to Jane, I ended up teaching Pilates through OLLI. Thanks to Jane, she got my husband Bob involved in teaching bridge. So anybody on this Zoom who has taken a bridge class or participated in those bridge activities can thank Jane. And I wouldn't be here today were it not for Jane. So my Pilates Plus class represented something I had wanted to do for a very long time. I gave up on being a ballet dancer, but I never gave up on doing movement as a lifestyle. And but I had to wait many years before I could afford to be a teacher where I didn't have to earn money. So it was really a dream realized. Here's another shot of my Pilates class, and I also taught exercise through the senior center. And then the next one would be another shot, because Pilates is more than an exercise system. It's also a community. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoyed the most. And one of the things that came to an abrupt halt, the reason I showed these slides was this was dream realized prior to March 12th. And the community was a big part of that. So anyway, as I look back, let's see, you can go to the next slide, Jane. Here we are. I'm in the Peace Corps. I had a degree in French, and I joined my fiance, got married in East Africa, in Kenya, lived in a little town called Machakos. I happened to look it up through Google. This is 50 years ago, and Machakos went from, you know, maybe the county center, but it was a small village. And I read that in 2009, it had 150,000 people, and now it has 1,400,000. So that says something about population growth, about change. I mean, when I was in the Peace Corps, I used to think I missed the golden age of being in Africa. I wish I'd been there in the late 19th century. But now I realize that when I was there was, for my time period, a really golden time. Let's see, I had one other little trinket. My students made me this necklace when I left. They made me other things, but I really like this necklace. It means a lot to me. And these are the students. There was some sort of outdoor activity that we were doing. They made their uniforms. It was a boarding school. It had been an English boarding school. So they had a swimming pool and a tennis court. The girls had to make their own swimming suits. And one of the things that I found really cute and funny was that I would have some of them beg me not to make them go in the pool and learn to swim because their hair would shrink. They'd spend hours ironing their hair so it would be straight. That was the fashion. And there are lots of other stories. I could go on about that, but I think that what I want to say about that period of time, and if you look at the bottom picture, me walking across this field, and you look over in the distance, it gives you some idea of the landscape of the country in which I lived for 2 years. And it was so open. I would sit on my porch during the rainy season, and I would watch the rain, just a sheet of rain, advance toward me. It was extraordinary, and you don't see that when you live in a city. I mean, I get an idea looking at the ocean, but it's not quite the way it was when I was in Kenya. So in the first 25 years of my life, I lived abroad in 3 different places. I feel like it developed in me a real appreciation for people, for other cultures, for a way of doing things. I feel like it gave me just an intrinsic flexibility that I've called upon many times in my life, and something that I call upon now. It makes me sympathetic, empathetic, I just feel that there's a level of understanding when you have that cultural disconnection from what you've grown up in. Next slide. Next, Jane. Okay, well, as I said, another theme in my life, here we are, horses. When we lived at Fort Sill, my father went back into the military during the Korean conflict. He had been on inactive duty in the reserves after World War II. But we found ourselves at Fort Sill, and Fort Sill had been a cavalry outpost, and it still had a stable. It had a couple of old draft horses that at one point had pulled the caissons. And I think this was the first time that I realized if you really wished for something very deeply, you could manifest it. And I manifested Bud. He was my horse. He was our family horse, but he wasn't very kind to my sister. She broke her wrist falling off him. My mother chipped her front tooth. I had no such things happen to me. I was in a horse show. They'd always have horse shows there. And we had to switch horses once to show our equestrian skills. I was on a very nice horse, did everything I wanted. Bud, once he had his new rider, promptly trotted right outside the ring, disqualified the guy. But horses have been a big part of my life. And when I was in East Africa, on the right-hand side, you see Joy Bell. And Joy Bell is a whole history in and of herself, but eventually she came to live at the school where I was teaching. I housed her in a garage. She didn't take long to figure out it was easy to move the bamboo poles. And I got into some trouble because she got into the headmistress's garden. So I had to keep her more contained. But Joy Bell would be a horse that my students would ride. We'd go to the tennis court and they'd ride around, and they got quite a thrill out of that. Well, horses eventually led me to the racetrack. And the picture that you see on the left is a horse named Ancient Title, who's a very good racehorse. And his groom is on the right, and there I am. And it's a shift. This is a really big shift. I want you to see that I'm wearing a military jacket that belonged to my dad that has, you know, his name, U.S. Army, patch from Japan, and all the little pins that represent things that are important to me. I don't wear this outside because I don't want to insult somebody who actually has gone to war or done something really difficult in the military, but it represents a skin that I shed to get to the racetrack. After I got back from the Peace Corps, I had a lifetime credential to teach secondary school, which is very, very hard to get. I know some of you who are on the Zoom are teachers, and really my admiration for you knows no bounds. But in order to get to the racetrack, I left a marriage. I decided I wasn't going to go to graduate school in public administration. I was going to shed a skin, move to LA, and begin a whole nother adventure. And I thought I went to work with horses, and indeed I did for 12 years, doing all sorts of things, starting as a hot walker and a groom. That didn't last for a very long time, realizing I was never going to ride a racehorse. That was way too dangerous. But eventually I worked my way through, worked myself onto the front side, worked my way into the press box. It was also a time in the early 70s when women were beginning to move into the kind of occupations that had only been available for men. And then I did that for a few years, and then I went to work for a horse trainer, the guy holding the little kid in the middle. And it was a fabulous job. I'd be at the racetrack in the morning around the horses. I didn't have to get there at 4 in the morning. I could get there at 8 or 8:30. And I'd do all sorts of paperwork in the afternoon. And if we had a horse racing, I'd dress up and go to the races, sit in the box that belonged to the trainer, John Russell. This happens to be one of my favorite horses, Greenwood Star. And so that was a very important part of my life, the most fun I ever had. You know, but things can't last forever and you move on with your life. But one of the things that happened, you know, I wrote articles about horses. This is about a guy who traded in his ancient coin and stamp collection and ended up having a very big racing stable, Bruce McNall. And next slide. And this is another article I wrote for the Horseman's Journal. And this is basically about me, but also about all the other women who had come to work at the racetrack. And what had attracted me, that kind of vitality, that energy that you get from people who spent their entire life working around this incredibly energetic energy, young horses. With the ups and downs, I mean, terrible things happen if you're dealing with a living being, but also very exciting things happen. And so you really had a chance, I had a chance to see how people dealt with adversity and how they came out of it, how there was always another day, another dance. It taught me a lot. But, and when I first went to work at the racetrack, giving up going to graduate school and all of that, moving to Los Angeles, I thought I was going to work with horses. But in fact, next slide. Oh, yeah, this is another thing that I did. The teacher and me had a chance to talk about horse racing. I found that a lot more interesting for me because I felt very passionately about it. Here I am with a group of, they look like kindergartners. And next slide. But what I realized upon arriving in LA was that I think I'll examine some other opportunities. And I vaguely knew about a profession called dance therapy. When I worked for the personnel department in Fresno, I had a board examine somebody for a job, and we had hired a dance therapist. We paid her to come be on the board. So I knew there was such a thing. And I decided, oh, here I am in LA. And within about 3 months of landing there, I, through a whole series of happy accidents, found Emily Conrad and Continuum. And it was in a phase, Continuum continued to change over the years. This is the book that she wrote about her work. I'll read you a couple of passages in a few minutes. But Emily was a movement innovator and so creative. She had spent her 5 years spent abroad were spent in Haiti with the dance troupe, learning about primitive dance, primitive movement, and that's what she brought to this class that I participated in. Whatever made me decide to stay with it, I can't really say. It seems so foreign from anything I'd ever experienced, but here I was, and it was one of the gifts that the horses gave me. There's the horse again. And the horses gave me a new way of seeing movement, and that's this person. So here's Emily, and this is after a workshop. The slide is slightly distorted, but anyway, Emily always, to me, she was always 10 years older than me. So I always would look at her and marvel at what a body. I met her when I was late 20s, almost 30. What can a body do in movement at the age of 40? And then it became at the age of 50, and then at the age of 60, and at the age of 70. And so here's Emily on a piece of equipment that she devised called the flight pattern. And Emily just embodied fluidity and curiosity and agelessness. you'll see that her leg is up in the air, but that's not something that she did muscularly. She was doing that energetically with the fluids in the body. And Emily became an innovator and a pioneer in working with people with spinal cord injuries and other extremely severe injuries. And it was really about innovating, not necessarily about recovery, but more about innovating new movements, new neural pathways, and the openings that would happen. And so Emily would always say movement is not something we do, it's really who we are. She was such an original person. She was really a philosopher of movement, curious. She would always experiment on herself before she'd ever present anything to anyone. And I really appreciated that level of participation on her part. In her work with paralysis, what she was really working with was a way to participate in the moment, in the fullness of not knowing what your outcome will be, with using breath, micro movements, curiosity. You can go on to the next slide. And here's me on the same piece of equipment. And one of the things that I can say about this photo of me is that I wouldn't know in this position how I was going to get out of this position. It's not like you go into it and then you're out. You go into it and then you go into it very slowly and you come out of it equally slowly. And I think that I want to try something with people. We'll see how this works. It's just a brief moment to try to understand what it's like to dive into movement for the sake of movement, not because it's utilitarian. And so this has to do with something everybody does in an exercise class. I would do this in my senior center. And, you know, there's a nice stretch to the right, to the left, front, not back too far because you don't want to crimp the back of your neck, ear. And I suggest that you close your eyes, let your breath help you slow down, and then just see where that movement might take you. And, you know, it might take you a year to drop your ear to the right, but other things will come up. You'll notice that there are other parts of your body that begin to get involved in that movement. And so if you want to just take a moment to try something like that, close your eyes, take a few breaths so you really are focused on your own breathing. It's your experience. And then as though your head were enclosed in, I don't know, a fish tank of some sort of circular thing, just let yourself begin to move ever so slowly, using your breath. Breath helps you slow down, and see if you notice where that might take you. And so, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, so it goes down into my spine. I'll have you come out and just take a moment to see if you noticed anything. And then if you want to share it or not, that's fine. What I might suggest, there are a couple of things. Okay. Thanks, Jane. What I might suggest with Emily, there's some wonderful YouTube videos that will introduce you to Emily and her philosophy and her dynamism and just what a creative force of nature she was. There's also the book, Life on Land, which I'm sure you could get anywhere. And there's also in Arcata, I have to say that Marilyn Montgomery, who teaches OLLI classes on meditation, is also a certified continuum teacher. So we can go on to the next slide. Next. Okay, here I am. Pilates has entered my life by now. I've been doing Pilates for probably 20, 25 years. And this is a slant board. I always find slant boards in nature. I have Emily's first slant board in my bedroom upstairs. It allows you to work against gravity, which was what you were seeing when you were looking at the picture of both Emily and me on the flight pattern. We were both working against gravity. And there's something really profound about having that different orientation. And so I'm doing Pilates here. Works wonderfully in nature. A little bit later, you'll see places in my yard and the heathers where I can move around and feel the earth. There's something wonderful about feeling nature, feeling the earth and moving. When I was hiking, I would find granite and things like that to lie on and to play with. Okay, go ahead and go on to the next slide. Let's see what comes up. And one of the motifs that I have really enjoyed playing with are octopuses. This is our multitasking octopus. What are you going to do if you have 8 arms? And octopuses find a home in the most watery of substances, and their movement is extraordinary. I spent part of an afternoon visiting friends in Pacific Grove who had tickets to the aquarium, and I would watch, totally fascinated, as the octopus would begin to come alive. As its color, if it was a giant Pacific octopus, would change from white to that orange glow, where you'd see little ripples in its skin as it was starting to waken up its feelers and move around, where it would taste what its environment was like. And I think the octopus was dancing for me. That's my take on it. That it knew I was there. It knew that I was curious. And if you want to know more about octopuses, if you can look up CBS Sunday Morning, yesterday, I guess, they had a whole thing on octopuses with the woman who wrote a book about them called The Soul of an Octopus. And there are pictures of octopuses that can change color, can change shape, can disguise themselves, they're just such a mutable creation. And I know they don't have bones, we have bones, but when you close your eyes and begin to draw in that kind of movement, that kind of octopus movement, you can begin to resonate with who they are and what they are. And I find that absolutely thrilling. That Emily would always say, we understand such a small part about who we are in the universe, in the biosphere, and that we have such adaptability. And you can, and so anyway, I'm inspired by octopuses. You can go on to the next slide. And the other creature, this is a land-based creature that I find fascinating, and that it's just your plain old snail. I think this is one of the Western snails, the Pacific snail, whatever they're called. But you put them in your hand or you watch them, and you watch them slowly creep out of that shell, the little antenna, look around, where am I? What am I going to do? Am I safe? And they're utterly fascinating. And to me, like the octopus, they also are a representation of how slowly one can move. And one of the things that I learned from Emily is in that kind of slowness, breath has to be a part of it. It's really hard to slow down otherwise. Emily would also use a lot of soundscaping. But in that really slowed down movement, you would see other doorways open. You'd see other possibilities open. And it's those other possibilities that with your attention and with curiosity, you can follow that pathway. And so in my Pilates classes, especially if somebody had been doing it for a while, I would really encourage people to listen to their own body, to deeply listen, to follow their impulses, that's where the new information is, and that's where you begin to own and exercise. And that was really the purpose of this thing with your head. When you slow down, you begin to notice and you begin to own that exercise. So let's go on to the next picture, which really is connecting to March 12th. This picture isn't exactly, this was obviously, she doesn't have on a mask, so this was pre-COVID, but she's enjoying one of the pleasures that I have found during this period of time, and that is in my own garden. This is my outdoor explore board. She's not using it like that. She's using it as just a way to lounge and enjoy the sun. But it is my explore board is something to really make me feel grounded, earthbound, and, you know, energy from the sun as well, but especially that kind of earthbound feeling and that ability to move with a different vibration, to move with the vibration of the earth. So the big challenge for me, you can go on to the next slide. Next. Okay, we're going to stay here for a moment. I told you that Jane is one of the threads in my life, and Sam was one of the delightful things that came as a result of Jane introducing me to her friend Mary, who had Sam. Mary did a lot of traveling during the 4 years that I knew her, and when she traveled, we'd have Sam. He was like a part-time dog. I loved that dog. And of course, the Heathers were a great deal of fun for him as well. I enjoy them, but animals also just really resonate with that. So in this period of COVID, and I call it Pilates in a time of pandemic, I had to figure out a way to connect with my class. And I don't Zoom. Oh, well, that is to say I didn't Zoom then. This is only my 4th Zoom, 3 of which were great brown bag lunches that Jane had presented, or Jane had worked on getting people to present the last 3 times. Anne Hartline, I had substitute taught for her when I first moved up here, and wonderful teacher, and the Coastal Commission and the zoo. They were wonderful talks. So this is the only time I'm participating myself. Where this goes, I have no idea, but I wanted to remain in contact with my class for a couple of reasons. I wanted to continue exercising, and so I decided that in this period of time, I needed some structure in my life, and the structure that I came up with was honoring the primary Pilates class, my ongoing class, from 9 to 10. I've invited other people to join, but from 9 to 10, Tuesday and Thursday, to join in exercising. And we're doing this in our own homes. I don't know what people are doing. I don't know if they show up. I know that I'm committed to showing up, and it's been very important to me because it's my time to not only do Pilates, but also do the plus side of Pilates, which is other things that need to happen, and other ways of exploring movement and of owning my own movement. So I call it exercise in the ethers. I send emails to people and keep in contact with them that way, but it provides the basic structure in my life. The other thing that I'm doing is gardening, and I just want to do a shout out to Bonnie. This is not Bonnie's garden. I've been learning to garden with Bonnie, who is really a master gardener, and I consider myself a sous gardener, like a sous chef. I'll do anything she says, and in exchange, I get this wonderful organic food. So that's really been, we garden together. I'm masked, she's masked, we're at a distance, and we're doing all the right things. But I also have my own flower, and I call it a flower and weed garden. It's really a collaboration between Fran, the woman that owned this house originally, and planned the bones of the garden. It's me who likes certain things. It's certain weeds that just tend to grow. I'll weed them, but they'll come back. And with really the participation of the birds and the wind and the rain, and gophers who move things around, snails who like to nibble on things. Gophers will make plants disappear or show up somewhere else. It just reminds me that we all thrive when the conditions are right. And it's been a fascinating journey for me to see what wants to grow next to what. You can go through a couple of, okay, one of the joys of this particular period of time is watching my own garden come alive through the seasons. This is the possibility in a lily that Kathleen gave me. And here it is, you know, this is late spring, I think. It might be early summer, and here it is when it's in its absolute full glory. And it's now disappeared, sadly. You know, that's the other thing. If you're a gardener, there are things that grow, there are things that disappear for the season, sometimes forever, sometimes they come back. This was a surprise. This is a shout out to Karen, who is a member of the Native Plant Society. Who would have thought that a Matilla poppy, and I know a lot of people call it a fried egg? I never heard that name till people mention that, but it's a Matilla poppy, and they grew all over the place when I lived in Ojai. And you'd see them out in the countryside, really different environment, very dry, but this Matilla poppy thrives here. I've seen them around town, and it thrives. It didn't mind the wind at all. I'd watch it whipping, and it looks like flying saucers to me. So I'm delighted with this plant, and delighted we have something called the Native Plant Society, where we can plant things that are bird and bee friendly. And this is a slide that represents community also. That's Kathleen and her dog Collie. I sometimes take care of Collie if Kathleen goes away. Kathleen's on my Heather chair, and we've done laughter yoga for years. So we decided we'd do it over the telephone when we couldn't meet in person. Then I'd walk with her at the beach. We're always masked, we're always distanced. And lately, she's been coming over and spending time in my garden. And I've been able to connect with people, with some of my community. I'm a part of an advanced directive group, some of whom I see on the Zoom. And we've been able to meet a couple of times outside, masked, distanced. And there's something so delightful about seeing people when you haven't seen them in a while, when they're not really scheduled per se, when they're not a part of the routine, when they become less than routine. And there's a real joy. I have discovered that joy with people. And a shout out to Joy also, who's not in this picture, and to Sue Durham, who is, for introducing me to authentic movement, where I can combine Pilates, Continuum, free-form movement, which is also one of my weekly anchors. And I think I want to read just a couple of things from Emily's book. I'm dealing with a knee issue, and so one of the things that I want to do during this period of time is to review what I know about movement, and so to see what I can do. And Emily's been gone 6 years now, but she spoke to me from the grave, and it has to do with the work that she did with spinal cord injury, where people were innovating new movement. And she says, I noticed, how utterly creative the biosystem can be without instructions from me. I've noticed over the years that our organism is perfectly capable of creating alternative systems, meaning that it's not necessarily regenerating, it's innovating. It's something new is coming up. And she tore the cartilage in her knee and used this idea to regenerate, She says, I severely tore the cartilage in my right knee during a dance class. Surgery was proposed. She didn't want surgery, and instead she worked with micro movements, which is working on the most minute cellular level, where you're beginning to stimulate just little wave motions, where you're letting the body take over. Well, she was able to regain full strength of her knee because an alternative system was built up. She brought stimulation, circulation, and her attention to induce electrical currents. And she said, I have no idea how to build this support directly, but I do have an idea of how to participate. And I think that's like the foundation for movement as I see it. You really want to be able to participate in the movement. And Emily's been gone, but I have one other thing I wanted to share with you, and it speaks to this time of COVID. She says, habitual responses, whether painful or delightful, are basically maneuvers of our defense system to maintain status quo. Guess what's been interrupted? It's our status quo. She says an habitual response can be ecstatic or difficult, and it really makes no difference. What matters is that our awareness is trapped in circulating familiar responses, no matter what they are. And so I feel like this break with COVID has given us a chance, maybe not anything anyone would have chosen, but here we are. We've broken with our routines. I'm finding that the rest is really good for me. I hope I become a better teacher when I finally am able to be a teacher again, you know, with a class. But it's just an exciting time. It's an exciting time not knowing what's next. And I guess that's one of the things that I learned from Emily. I don't know what's next. I do know that I now can Zoom, thanks to Jane, who pushed me into this. I've been reflecting on my life. That was another push from Jane. But I also, it's, you know, 2 months before the election. And so for the next phase of my life, I see myself doing whatever is necessary to involve myself in making the changes that I feel we need in this country. So last slide, please. Next, Jane.
I'm trying.
Oh, it's all right. Anyway, it was just a...
Whoa.
It's okay. It's okay, Jane. I'll just say what I wanted to say about it. And it was a slide. I had I was very nervous about making this. You don't need to do this. Very nervous about making this presentation. And I went way back into, you know, the threads of your life, the tapestry. And I had worked for a tape company, a self-improvement tape company, when we lived in Ojai. And I made tapes. And I'd listened to them. And I actually made a MINDTALK tape. And that's what this was. It was a MINDTALK tape saying, here you are. Think you can. This one was unshakable self-esteem and self-confidence. I felt like I needed to listen to this before I made this presentation. And I think this is good advice. Think you can, think you can't. Either way, you're right. And that's a quote from Henry Ford. And now I turn it over to Jane, who will have a very fascinating thing. And I have one last thing to say to you. Goodbye.
That's wonderful. Are there any questions that anybody has that they'd like to ask of Joanne? Yes? No?
Okay.
Anybody?
Thanks.
Is there anybody on chat? Kim?
I don't know. There's no questions on chat. But Joanne, just so you know, I did share a link to the YouTube, an introduction with Emily Conrad in the chat, as well as the Mysteries of the Octopus.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
So those are both
and
in chat.
I do see something that one person, Radaya, is a friend of mine from Ojai, and we did movement together in my living room. And she says, as my right arm crept right, my left leg began to float up on its own, which is really awesome. So anyway, thank you. Thanks, Kim. Bye, everybody.
All right, I think Jane's going to go next, and she's going to share. I think you're getting ready to do your slideshow, Jane.
Right, I am, and I'm trying to figure out how to get it up right now because I've got it on board. I'm getting rid of the other one. Here it is. Can you guys see it?
You have to share your screen, Jane.
I can't get at that. Can you do that?
I can't share your screen for you. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, share screen. Okay, where'd it go? There it is. From beginning. Okay, there you go. And I'm going to talk about the life and times of Jane, and my kind of theme is don't just stand there, do something, in recognition of John Lewis, because I think that's a good theme for my life in reality. I guess I'm supposed to show myself. Do you really want to see me? There I am. Okay. I got to get back on the thing. There we go. As a result of COVID, of course, we've had no in-person Pilates, no group coffee get-togethers afterwards, no bridge get-togethers or EDC Economic Development Committee meetings, AUW events, center arts, plays, movies, OLLI brown bag lunches in person, OLLI curriculum committee meetings in person, group forest walks, summer vacations from OLLI. We had a summer vacation from OLLI's brown bag lunch program, but I didn't get one because we decided to go online. And all of a sudden, instead of having the summer off, I had programs to put together. So we started in the spring, and this is the summer one that we put together. And these are the ones you've been enjoying of late. So that's kept me quite out of mischief. And then we just finished the one for the fall. So that program is going to be coming out shortly. That catalog you should be getting in the next couple of weeks. The other major thing I've been doing has been, there's this whole series that's been online of about 9 episodes each of about an hour each on the oral microbiome, the gut microbiome, a series called Proven, which is talking about proven new techniques or proven techniques that work, functional medicine related for the most part, but all kinds of things. And I just copied a couple of the summary pages, but it's been very interesting and stimulating to learn about different, and there's a whole series called Immune Defense, which was interesting to me to learn about how to address the possibility of Russ or myself or my friends getting COVID, and how to respond and how to prevent it from happening to us to begin with. So I've spent hours and hours. I've probably attended 7 of these, and there's a wealth of information like this online. Some of them are through Dr. Mark Hyman, who's been director of functional medicine at the Cleveland Clinic and has developed a lot of these, or encouraged the development of a lot of these online programs and recommended them to people. Dr. Pedram Shojai is one of the major people, and Michael Polizzi. But there are ones by Jonathan Otto, by Sarah Otto and her spouse. It's been interesting. And then, of course, aside from that, daily forest and street walks. We go on the street on weekends when the forest is kind of busy because my husband is concerned about being able to stay away from people far enough. I go on evening walks with my neighbor and with Andy, gleaning berries, noticing the seasonal changes, hummers, dragonflies, frogs, and other critters that co-inhabit our environment. It's called mindful walking. Here's a little green frog that landed on our door. These are we watch as the various seasonal flowers and berries come and go. These are the trillium at various stages. They start out pure white and they go pink, but they go through transitions as they get there. We had, and it's fun, every once in a while you find a total anomaly, which is an iris that instead of having 3 prongs has 5, which is totally unique. I watch every year to see if that same plant comes back with a 5-pronged iris, and it doesn't. So I think I just captured a very unique occasion. And then Andy is my companion on these walks along with my husband, or Marilyn. And he's such a doll. We love him dearly. He took over the couch about 8 years ago in our lives. And every once in a while I get to share it with him. But he's an absolute delight. My love of horses has added the love of dogs, because when I grew up, we weren't allowed pets. And so I've made up for it as I've gotten older and had the ability to do it on my own. So it started with cats and turned into cats and dogs, and then now dogs. I spent a lot of time in my garden watching things grow. With the flowers, that happens to be a pear tree. And to the right is a plum tree. So we've been gleaning the plums, and since they all tend to come in too small a time period, I've been delivering them to my neighbors. And then I've been spending more time with my horses. This is my orphan. She's now 20 years old, my orphan. Katie was born, when I was raising horses, I had a camera in the stall, and I noticed at about 6 a.m. in the morning that her mom was down. And so I went out, and her mom had prolapsed. So I called the vet, and he couldn't get there in time. So she ended up having the run of the barn and grew up as my orphan at about 5 months of age. I mean, I started teaching her how to drink milk out of a dog bowl. And then we moved, she figured that out in about 4 hours, and she grew to be taller than most of her siblings, which was interesting. At about 5 months of age, I had to toss her in with the other mares and foals so she'd become more adjusted to being a horse versus a people. And this is Tango. He's another of the horses I brought out here to from the herd of Arabians that I had. He's such a love, and because he's such a young and beautiful horse and I wasn't riding enough, I actually found him a new home with a couple that would be riding him and playing with him daily, because I felt it wasn't fair to have a horse of this caliber just sitting around in pasture so much of his time. But he's an absolute dear. We raised him, and this is his dad, who was a show horse. And I had planned on bringing his dad out here, and we gelded him in July. He was living at the vet's, and they gelded him, and unfortunately it did not work, and he passed away, so he never got here. But I couldn't bring a stallion out here to California and have him at freshwater. There was only one place I could find where I could keep a stallion, and that was unlikely to work. So, you know, that's just part of the tales of Jane's life. I've spent time reading, lots of reading and writing, cleaning up piles, files in the garage, history that needs to be fixed, because we have accumulated a lot of stuff. I've restarted playing the piano. I've watched way too much disturbing political TV, along with lots of great PBS and BBC programming. And of course, since as part of preparing for this brown bag lunch program, and I put this together, I think in May, I put Joanne in I invited Joanne to join me to talk about this topic, what we've been doing during our lives during COVID and how it's affected our thinking and caused us to review our lives. And are we looking at things differently? Of course, there's some of the things that have been inspired by all the coverage of John Lewis. And looking back, I had this wonderful quote from Martin Luther King, which I think is a wonderfully powerful thing to remember at the moment. So in reviewing my life's continuum, which was interesting to me to see, is Joanne called it a tapestry. And there are many, many threads in my tapestry as well. And I looked and said, okay, how did I grow up? And where am I living now? Has my life really changed? And when I looked at it, I said, oh, okay, I grew up in a middle class life in a suburb right smack outside Youngstown, Ohio. We had a Greek neighbor on one side and an Italian on the other, and that represented what was going on in what was then called Murder Town, USA, because there was a fight over the numbers racket. The Italians were taking it over from the Greeks, and the Greeks on my right side was a lovely patrician older couple who were no longer obviously in the business. And on the left side of our house were the Italians, and my mother was very suspicious because they had 2 telephone lines going into their house. And it's like, why would anybody in the 1950s have 2 telephone lines going into their house? But in any event, it was a suburban, it was also a farm community. So we had no blacks in my school. We had obviously some white variations. But it was basically a kind of a plain vanilla situation. My only association with blacks in reality was my father warning, be careful when you drive downtown going through this neighborhood, don't stop on the way down. And basically we had an absolutely lovely woman who cleaned our house and one who came to do the ironing. And my sister used to talk to Jenny Wolf, who did the ironing, and mother was sure she did the numbers, wrote the numbers, but she was lovely and older, and that's when we had a mangle, among other things. And Grace is the one I asked when I wanted to know, when I'd gone to college and came back home, of course, to learn about contraceptives. I didn't ask my mother, of course. So I asked Grace. But they were almost like family members because they were there my entire life. Every week. Jenny Wolf every 2 weeks. But they were part of the family, but not of the family. And that lifestyle continues today. We live in a suburban neighborhood in a small city. Youngstown was a bigger city. But we live in a small city in a very nice neighborhood. Multicultural. I have Mexican American on one side. Beyond that are 2 Chinese teaching. One is teaching at HSU. And beyond that, Russian. Across the street, we have a mixed neighborhood. We have a daughter, a grandson who's half black. And so we have adjusted, but it's not been a difficult adjustment at all because our lifestyle really hasn't changed. I grew up with my parents playing bridge, with my father gardening, playing golf, things like that. So has anything really changed? I play bridge for sport, I garden. So when I look at that, it's like, what has changed? Well, not a whole lot. My thinking has changed. My philosophy has changed. I grew up with going to church in my Sunday best every week to taking a course in religion at school, and that finished that off at college. And I've in essence evolved a different philosophy of existentialism, which is you are the sum of your experiences, and I've compiled a whole slew of them. I looked back and said, okay, I've enjoyed traveling. We started out with doing family trips. We happened to go down to Cuba before Castro because my uncle in-law was Episcopal Bishop of Cuba. So we got to go down there at Christmas, which was totally novel to go swimming. We used to go to Chautauqua a couple times on vacation, and that's where I had my first job after my first year at school, college. And since then, I've traveled a lot. I went youth hosteling for 4 months in Europe, then lived there for another 8, working for their equivalent to the Department of Education. We've traveled throughout the US and Canada, and I still enjoy traveling, but I've become way much more of a homebody. Started out with mainly individual sports, skating, skiing, hiking, swimming, boating, and walking, and then group activities, mainly card games, other games, badminton, sailing. We played hide and seek. I don't know whether all of you did, but we did, and my family played golf. Other areas of continuity have been my love of horses. I used to pester my mother to take me out to go take lessons on the ponies, and then later the horses, and got to go to camp with my older sister and spend as much time as possible on their little equivalent to Trigger. First thing I did when I got out of college and ended up teaching German at my high school because they lost their German teacher a week beforehand school started, is I got a Tennessee walking horse and had a wonderful time. That year after school, I'd go pick up a Big Mac. I don't think they had Big Mac shit. I think we just had Macs and cheeseburgers. And I'd go out and ride. Or after that, I decided to learn how to fly a plane. And so I took plane lessons and got to do my solo. And when it got snowy and we had snow around, and I had one experience, I did my solo, but then one day I had an experience, and I was coming to the end of the school year, but close enough, and planning to go to Europe. When I landed, I kind of skidded too darn close to the snowbank at the end. And I said, this is interesting. I've figured out how to fly. I know how to do this. It's kind of once you're in the air, unless you're going to do something stupid, it's more like driving a car in the air. So I think it's more fun to ride horses, which is what I did. I still have 3 horses. I became a horse breeder at age 42. Quite coincidentally, but I'd always wanted to have, we had moved to Colorado. We moved a lot. After spending my entire youth in one place in Youngstown, Ohio, from then until I was 23, I then moved a lot. I went to Europe, Germany, traveled, and then was in Germany for the rest of the year, moved to Washington, and then went to the University of Pittsburgh. After that, I worked at the University of Pittsburgh for about 5 years, and then moved. I happened to watch the whole Watergate because I was consulting at the time, and watched the Watergate hearings and got inspired to swap careers. And I moved to Washington, and I started a career in taking the program development I'd done at the University of Pittsburgh, because we started the first university external studies program, and I was in charge of curriculum development there. Then we didn't have computers, of course. We were just starting introducing computer assisted instruction in the schools, and the dilemma then was, how do you get a computer small enough to put in a trailer outside a school so you can have instruction for the kids? So things have changed a lot since the 70s. So I basically went on to spend time in Washington. It took 5 years to get a joint degree in law and public administration while I worked at the Urban Institute during the day, and went to school at night, met my husband. We then went from there to Nashville because he got a job at Vanderbilt. Well, we both worked in law for about a year. And then he got a job at Vanderbilt teaching engineering. Off we went to Vanderbilt. I consulted for a year and then started something called Career Conventions. Well, I bought a business called Career Conventions. And then after doing that, and having a couple of career conventions for women, then I started Nashville's Business Expo. And this was the first year we did that. And we did it first down in the municipal auditorium, and ultimately at the Music City. There I am. So we put together a program, and the theme for this year, we had, what was the theme? Let me see. I don't even see the theme on this one. One was toward the year 2000. I did this for 7 years, putting together the Business Expo. I only did three career conventions, I believe, for women, but it was very exciting. It gave me the opportunity. We had probably about between 120 and 160 exhibitors, and that's how we funded a three-day conference, which was all about businesses. And so we worked with the Chamber of Commerce. We worked with a local public relations company, and the Tennessean that was run by John Ziegenthaler at the time published our program as well. So it had a lot of public participation, and it gave me lots of lessons in running businesses. But after that, we moved back to DC. I worked for EPA, and because I thought, okay, I've been consulting outside of government. Now I'll see what it's like to be inside government after running a private business, and learned what the restrictions are when you're trying to work within the government and under laws that don't allow you to attack the problems that really need to be attacked because they have limited your ability to do that. So if, for example, you have air pollution and 70% of the problem is coming from diesel, sorry, you can't regulate diesel trucks. You can only regulate something else, car emissions or something less important with respect to diesel. And you can only, so you over-regulate that particular area and can't tackle the sorts of some of the main problems like landfills, for example. They still are having problems regulating the methane from landfills, let alone from oil production, gas production. Anyway, after that, I'm in DC. I still am, I'm consulting there. I'm running my business. I'm going back and forth to Nashville. And then we moved to Denver. And I about burned myself out. I traveled back and forth to Washington for 2 years, finishing up the programs that I was working on there. I sold my business in Nashville after trying to continue it, because if you're running a business that's built around you, you really can't run it from afar. And I started breeding horses because I had burned out. I had tried to do way too much in too short of time, and I was 42, and I started doing what I'd wanted to do my entire life, which was racehorses. So I grew up loving horses, and I finally got to live on a ranch. We had 80 acres outside of Denver, up on top of the foothill. I grew lots and lots of real deep roots there. And one day my husband went out and counted 87 horses, which was a little bizarre. And because I got addicted, and I learned about addiction, which was a good lesson to learn, that you can overdo and put everything aside because you absolutely love this. We happen to, I find horses to be aesthetically beautiful creatures, particularly Arabians, because they are so naturally beautiful and they have such a spree and sensitivity. So that's been a theme I have continued when we moved to California. Of course, I had to disperse the horses. I brought 3 with me. I still have 3. And I still go and visit with them and continue to work with them. They taught me empathy. They taught me how to live in the present, how to use your energy, that if you're dealing with horses, you have to go in with a very calm energy. If you don't, you cause havoc. So it was a lesson in managing energy and being sensitive to the horse's energy, because your energy tees them off. It became a good judge of people when somebody would come to look at the horses to see whether the horses would go to them or get away from them because they didn't like their energies. And horses pick people. When I was marketing the foals, often the foal would choose the person. They'd follow them around everywhere. And it was very interesting to watch. You learn about nonverbal communication and animal intelligence and leadership skills, because you have to be the head mare in your herd. If you're going through a group of horses, they have to respect you or you'd get run over. You learn all sorts of emergency response. Like one day I went out in the barn and there was a mare in Pete, and she'd gotten too close to the stallion's stall. It had a feeder window, and I go out and he is hung up through the stall window with his tippy toes still in the stall, not quite reaching the floor, and there he is. And I had to go get the tractor and unscrew the stall wall and let him out. So you learn to be how to deal with unexpected emergencies without getting traumatized. I had a spirit horse, Musketeer. He was an amazing creature. He was like my Black Beauty and Fury rolled into one. And I've never forgotten that horse. He became, you discover that even when you're breeding, that you never get those same traits the generation down. You get some of them in each of the get. You may get the color, you may get the eyes, you may get the neck, you may get the esprit, but there are absolutely special horses. He'd been a halter champion in Canada, on the Pacific coast, but he'd also been abused, so he was not when I called David Boggs after I got him, he said, "Get rid of him, he'll kill you." It's like, thanks. David Boggs was the top, and still is the top trainer in the United States. And I said, you know what, I just have to protect this horse from people because he understands justice. And so you have to have mutual respect. And those were very good lessons, and I never let him be abused again. I had one kid that came and tried cleaning his stall, and I caught him taking in a pitchfork because he was afraid of him. And it's like, you're out of here. So you have to learn to, they're horses that have to be treated with special care and protected from people. And I was very careful with his Get, who were also very sensitive, and very intelligent. I learned the meaning of charisma. Charisma is a concept that some people have where they have such high energy, you know when they've come into the room. Somehow you see them enter and they affect everybody in the room. Their energy is so strong. This horse had that. And when he'd come out of his stall and he'd dance and prance, and you could go in and play with him, and he'd rear and wheel and spin and dance and hook his neck over. And it was a beautiful, for me, it was an aesthetic thing. And it was an incredible appreciation of the power of nature. So I brought Brass, Katie, and Tango out with me. And I've continued to have horses in my life. And of course, I've always loved the environment. I was outdoor as much as possible when I was a kid, when I wasn't indoors reading, which was my alternative reality. I worked at EPA. When I came here, I worked with Zero Waste Humboldt and Transition Humboldt. It's always been fundamental to me, and I spend as much time outdoors as I can justify. I learned practical life skills, gardening, car and house maintenance, carpentry, driving. My dad let me drive a couple nights before I turned 16, and it was like, wow, this is cool. But it has carried me forth because I've used those skills, and it gives you a confidence the rest of your life. And I would wish all kids had the opportunity to learn basic skills, because later we were able to build our own barns, we were able to renovate our homes, we were able to maintain those homes. And these are skills you wish every kid would learn. I've maintained my middle class Christian values that I grew up with, and took a while to learn that it's better to give than receive, and that I learned to work hard and persist until the job is done. You do that kind of thing when you're getting the opportunity to mow the lawn, wash the car, put up, weed the garden, etc. Those are little things that you learn in the home environment. And pride in family, that you're supposed to give back. You've been privileged, and watching my mother do civic work, she would have been a great executive, except she married a Southerner who expected his dinner ready when he got home. And because she was working in personnel when they got married, and they were both working at US Steel, she had to quit. So we had a frustrated executive as a mother, which was why perhaps both my sister and myself became professionals, and perhaps understand, as well as continued doing civic work. Both of us have. And we were taught to respect all people. I've always loved reading. My dad hauled us to the library once or twice a week, and we brought home lots of books that went on the rubber chest in the back of the house. And I ultimately ended up reading my horse stories and my sister's romance historical novels, and my father's Zane Grey and mysteries and things of that nature. So I had a wonderful time reading fiction growing up. I developed a love of learning and languages, which has continued, and to this day. And I maintained a philosophy of existentialism since college, which is basically you are the sum of your experiences. And the more experiences you accumulate, and the more languages you have, the broader your experiencing of life. My learning of languages in college, although this started when I was in high school, actually it started in grade school because we had a teacher who taught us some French in 5th and 6th grade, but then I took Latin, French, and German in high school and then majored in languages. That enabled me not only to have a skill that I could teach with by accident, although I never planned to teach, and then I could go to Germany, be a translator. I worked on the first thesaurus for programmed instruction in Berlin, West Berlin at the time. And I have a new concept of what it means to learn new languages, which is basically that each new area of learning, such as biology or physics, whether it's an area of science or an area of art, these all have their own languages. And so you don't have to learn a foreign language. Each area of study has its own language. Sociology, there are a set of terms. So as you undertake study of a certain area, you basically learn a new language. I've always loved music. I've been adaptable to change, new jobs, new professions, and other areas of continuity. I've tended to take on challenges and then have to perform. I tend to stay too busy. These are things I've discovered. Decided to drop the EDC, Economic Development Committee, to focus more on OLLI, a realization that we're older and need to clean up our act, and a renewed focus on a healthy lifestyle, whether it's food, physical, or mental exercise. And basically, through all these things that I've done, I've discovered I thrive on change and intensive learning experiences while maintaining stable relationships and continuity. My philosophy of life and basic values are unchanged. I dislike paperwork, housework, and looking backward, and I have no fear of death, but I aspire to be at least a healthy and active 95-year-old. So if you do, I like Joseph Campbell's concept. If you do follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you, and the life that you ought to be living is the one you are living. Follow your bliss and don't be afraid, and the doors will open where you don't know where they were going to be. So my interpretation is we're not seeking meaning in life, but an ecstatic experience of living. So I'm asking what brings you joy. And these are a couple of pictures from Cosmic Visions, which is a course I took with Stone Brusca about 8 years ago. He was a fantastic teacher. So, although it's your turn now, we've used up all the time, which I very much apologize for. Because we were supposed to take about 20 minutes each and allow you to address these questions. Basically, how has the pandemic affected your life? Has it changed you in any way? Your habits, your lifestyle, your plans going forward? And has it given you time to reflect on the continuum of your life from your cultural upbringing to the present? And if not, how has that changed? And because there's so little time, if some of you want to chat for a few minutes and talk, be my guest. I'd love to have you do that. Sorry we took up so much time. If those of you who would like to do that, feel free. We can talk now, or maybe we can continue another time. Does anybody have any questions? Is there anything in the chat room? Yes? No? Well, then I suggest you go back. Oh, Nancy.
Yes. First of all, don't you dare apologize. I so enjoyed both you and Joanne. You did exactly what you should have done. You gave us a beautiful, beautiful morning. So thank you, thank you. Yes, we need to finish this another time, but it was great.
Thank you very much. Lovely.
Thank you. I really did want to give everybody time to talk.
Hi, Jane.
Yeah?
Hi, Ann and Jim. It's just Ann and Jim. We really, really enjoyed both your presentation, but we didn't quite get the name of that cosmic dance instructor. You said it was very good.
That was by Stone Brusca, B-R-U-S-C-A. He no longer is here. He used to teach at Humboldt. He taught physics.
I see. physics, right? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you so
and
much.
it used to be Steve Brusca before he was Stone.
Right, Steve Brusca,
Before he
yes.
got a little stoned, I think maybe occasionally. He's
Yeah.
Buddhist, very interesting man, the most intense presenter I've ever seen. He had the most incredible course. I took it actually 4 times because I'd never studied physics. And
Yeah.
the course grew and he added parts. So I just kept going back.
Wow.
I didn't
We've
want
been
to.
looking for him actually. He's the one who actually talked about Humboldt County. We know decades ago. He told us how much he enjoyed living in Humboldt County. Then after we moved here, we haven't, we didn't know how to find him. So
I don't know where he is. I don't know whether he's still here. He doesn't respond to emails anymore. He has a son and former wife here, or 2 former wives, I believe. So I don't know much.
Thank you. We thought, yes.
Any other questions, comments?
I have a comment to thank you both for expanding my knowledge of who you are as people. And I remember shortly after my husband died and this group of ours got together and you guys gave me an opportunity to talk about part of what was going on in my life. And it was so freeing and it gave me such a different perspective. And I would love to hear what it's like for you guys after you've done this and maybe get some feedback. But also, I want to have this kind of thing happen for everybody that has shown up today or anybody who wants to participate. Just being able to tell your story can be so healing and so engaging and energizing. It's a miraculous kind of thing. I was thrilled to know all of these things about you guys.
Well, you know, what's fascinating is many times you don't find about, we don't tend to talk about our histories, okay? So many times you don't find out who people are or who they've been until you read their obit.
Yes.
Until they're dead, yes. Oh, I never knew that. How come I never got to talk to them about that?
Yeah.
The truth is that this is exactly what we do every Friday morning with Let's Connect with Tracy Barnes Priestley from 10 until 11 every Friday.
Yeah, and she picks different topics each time.
Well, as a way for us to share ourselves with the others in our breakout group. And some of the people who've been participating every time are so grateful for this time of sharing with others to know themselves.
Yeah.
If you ask yourself the questions that I've posed, basically, it kind of forces you to look back on your life and say, okay, have you changed? How have you changed? Have you really changed? How do you want to live going forward? Have you done what you hope to do in your life? And it's amazing when you look and see all the threads that have continued and how you're engaging in your world now. But life is exciting if you make it exciting and if you have a passion for learning and a curiosity. And that's what we hope to stimulate through these conversations and through these talks to let people know. The Brown Bag Lunch Program is my way of inviting you all to discuss things that I happen to be interested in, and I think you will be too. I welcome you all to basically suggest topics that you'd like to have for the Brown Bag Lunches. Be my guest. Love to have you do that. Any other comments? Hi, Claudia. You are comfortable.
I was just going to interrupt. Sorry, Jane. I did put the link to Let's Connect in the chat, but if you have never gone or if you're interested and you're not in the chat, you can go to the OLLI website to sign up for one of the Let's Connect gatherings that Karen mentioned. And then I also put the link in the chat to the September, or the brown bags that are moving forward starting September 21st.
Yeah, we get a break.
Yeah, we're taking a little, next weekend is Labor Day weekend, or Monday as a holiday for all of HSU and for most of us. And then the following month, we're starting the fall term on September 21st, which is the brown bag. And Jane mentioned the OLLI catalog. It should be arriving in homes this week, and we will be putting the classes live on our website starting on Wednesday, September 2nd. Just because we're all here and you all know, I want you all to know that we're going to a new customer management system. So the way that course confirmations and all that information is delivered is going to be a little different. So that's why things haven't been, the website hasn't been made live yet, because we're just not quite there. So I also really want to thank Jane and Joanne for sharing. I think what you shared was very rich, and it was really, really nice to get to know you, as other people have already mentioned. So thank you all for being here and for being supportive of OLLI and attending these great presentations. And Jane, thanks for all the work that you do with OLLI. And Joanne, yeah, I'm hoping that you're going to be Zooming with us more and coming to hopefully teaching some of your Pilates classes with us again soon. So
Yeah.
thanks,
And
everyone.